So I think the biggest challenge for the NBA is tweaking its system, whether it's a defensive rule change. They've got to do something to bring some of these numbers down to diversify the offense a little more than just, hey, we're going to drive and kick, or we're going to shoot early shot clock threes. That, I think, is something that everyone in the NBA will agree with.
You know, I've got the fix, Chris. It's really obvious. You just reduce the value of a three-pointer to like 2.6. Done. It is my pleasure to welcome to the podcast for the first time ever, senior writer for Sports Illustrated on the NBA and boxing, Chris Mannix. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me, Andrew. And I would say this was probably the most unexpected request that I've had in like the last 10 years of
nice
writing, I would say. So,
yes,
respect.
10 years of writing. Well, very, very happy to have you on. People know I'm a big hoops head and hoops fan, and who better to go to than someone like you who's an insider about all things NBA in particular. We're going to talk NBA. I'm not as much of a boxing guy as I am an MMA guy. But you have a career that a lot of people dream of. I know that after you're in it, it's quite difficult and blah, 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 blah. But you want to give people a sense of your path for some young folks who probably, frankly, dream of being sports writers.
Yeah, I mean, I was fortunate that I had a direction pretty early on. I grew up in Boston, and my uncle was or is Kevin Mannix, who for about 30 some odd years covered the Patriots for the Boston Herald. And he was one of the originators of the Monday morning report card, which was always kind of a must read in newspapers back in the day to see what the local writer gave for grades for the coaching, special teams, quarterback, all that. And I just remember, being at holidays and talking to him about his job, and even, Thanksgiving, seeing him miss holidays because he would be off, covering NFL games. And I just kind of gravitated towards that very early on. And I had a decent skill for writing early in my life. So I kind of put those two things together. And I really, everything I did from a pretty young age was kind of building towards getting to wherever it is that I am right now. I mean, I worked for about 8 years as a ball boy for the Boston Celtics back in the day, which not only was like the greatest college job you could ever have. You walk out of the building with like $200 in cash, which would last you like an entire weekend. But it also enabled me to meet some, really, influential writers back then. People like Jackie McMullen, Ian Thompson, Jack McCallum, among others, that really became mentors to me and helped me, help steer me, kind of in this direction.
Well, congratulations. I think everyone you named is a Sports Illustrated journalist because I read all of their work. I was a subscriber for a long time. And I had friends who worked at the parent company. Obviously, that industry has gone through a lot. I feel a little bit like you're, like one of the hardy survivors, which I'm sure required a lot of adaptation on your part. So you cover the NBA, which we'll get into in detail, and boxing. Stupid question, but I have to ask. Do you wind up covering those things because you're a fan, or is it like, hey, I show up and they're like, oh, we need a boxing guy?
So the NBA, certainly a huge fan. When I was hired at SI, I had some decent credentials, right? I went to Boston College, and during my time there, I worked at the Boston Globe covering high school sports. So when they were looking for a fact checker initially at SI, because my first 4 or 5 years at the magazine were spent fact-checking stories. I mean, I had a decent resume for that. And, having worked for the Celtics for so many years, I had a pretty intimate knowledge of the NBA and everything that went on into it. So I was always interested in NBA writing. Boxing was a completely different story. Like boxing, I was the most casual of boxing fans throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. I watched Mike Tyson fights. I watched Oscar De La Hoya fights. But other than that, I couldn't have told you, 10 boxers. I couldn't have rattled them off a list. Around 2007, 2008, we had a boxing writer named Richard Hoffer, who was a brilliant writer. He worked out in Los Angeles. And sometimes when they did these one-page stories in the magazine, they wanted to be careful on travel. They didn't want to pay excessive amounts for travel. So there were a lot of fights back then in Atlantic City and even at Madison Square Garden. And, one of the weeks I was in the office, I said, hey, if you don't want to send Hoffer, or if you want someone to cover these local events, I'd be happy to do it. I don't know anything about boxing, but I'll learn. And I did cover a couple of fights in AC and at MSG. And, over the course of between 2008 and 2010, Richard left the company. And all of a sudden, I turned around and I'm basically the senior boxing writer. So I kind of fell into it. And really, once you get into it, Andrew, it really is maybe the greatest writer's sport out there, because nobody with any sensibility gets into boxing, voluntarily gets into boxing. And I say that as someone that is currently married to a professional boxer. So I know kind of what goes into their minds and how they get into it. But because they come from these extreme circumstances and have to work so hard, they always have these incredible stories from the best of the best, like Floyd and Oscar, to even the lesser known guys who are just trying to scrape out a living. So if you're looking for a sport for a writer that wants to tell stories, there aren't any better than boxing.
Hey, I've got a story to pitch you in real time, which you probably already know about. But I was sitting next to a boxer named Brandon Lee, who at the time is undefeated. And he's half Asian, half Mexican. And he jokes that he's got the toughness of a Mexican and the smarts of an Asian. That's his line, not my line. And so my suggestion to him was like, hey, man, you should walk out to the Crow music and just have some Crow get up, jacket with a crow on it. I was like, people would freaking eat it up. And he wasn't a huge Brandon Lee Crow fan, but he's like, yeah, I'll talk to my manager about it. I don't know if you've come across Brandon Lee in your.
Oh yeah, I know Brandon. Good power. I think he's been a little inactive over the last couple of years. I think he needs to get back on that track. But I like his game a lot. He's a strong, smaller weight fighter. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, he's a really good dude too. I liked him a lot.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll see more of him. So on the NBA side, it sounds like you grew up a Celtics fan if you were a ball boy for 8 years. I remember seeing the rise of Bill Simmons as the alpha blogger during that time. FYI, I've never liked the Celtics at all because I grew up a Knicks fan. And so, anytime the Celtics were threatening to be good, My brother went to school in Boston, though, so he was a big Celtics fan when they won the title with KG and Paul Pierce and Rayon and that crew. So at the time, and I hate the Lakers too. So I was like, yeah, sure. I guess I find myself rooting for the Celtics. But in your case, the fandom, at this point must be checked at the door because you cover everybody. But is it fair to say you grew up a Celtics fan? You're a big Celtics fan?
Yeah, I was a big Celtics fan growing up. The Larry Bird years, I was a little young for them, but the early 1990s, I was a big Reggie Lewis fan. D Brown winning the slam dunk contest. These are the things that resonated with me. I started working for the team in, I think it was 1995, the first year the new building in Boston opened up. And I mean, they were really bad. They had,
dude, I'm going to run some names by you just because it's so fun. Sherman Douglas.
Oh yeah.
Dino
Great floater.
Derek Strong, Eric Montross. I remember the Celtics of that era because I was, just like a big hoops guy. And when I visit my brother in Boston, we'd talk about taking in a game.
Oh, Andrew, I could do this all day long with you. Brett Szabo, Marty Conlin.
Marty Conlin, remember that guy? Wait, Purvis Ellison. We forgot about Purvis.
Never Nervous Purvis was great. Great guys, too. I love being around those guys. David Wesley was a big part of that team.
Dana Barros.
They were great guys. They were just so bad. They were just so – and look, I got a bird's eye view of the Rick Pitino experience in the pro ranks, and it was not good. It was not good. I mean, Rick was –
yeah. Pitino,
I mean, just an excellent – yeah. He was just an excellent he was an excellent basketball mind, and he clearly knew how to get through to young players.
Yeah.
But when he got to the pros and these young guys didn't want to be talked to like they were 18-year-old or 19-year-old freshmen and sophomores anymore, and they made more money than him, like that, it just never quite meshed. He could never figure out how to coach a professional player.
And they didn't want to run themselves into the ground like they're 19-year-olds. I remember that too. They brought in Chris Mills, I think. Or no, I'm trying to remember that era when he was trying to get everyone to press, and then he drafted Mercer and Billups and traded Billups pretty quick.
It wasn't. Let me just say this: it wasn't the Billups Mercer draft was tough. Like he expected to get what was the Duncan Van Horn. Like I think those are the two guys he expected to get. The draft that killed them though was a couple of years I think later when they had 3 firsts and they drafted Joe Johnson, Kedrick Brown, and Joe Forte. That was the same year that the Nets had a few draft picks and they drafted Richard Jefferson and Jason Collins. So it's all, I always say this about the NBA. It always comes down to who you draft. If you draft well, there's like a 90% chance you're going to have a lot of success.
Yeah. Stan Van Gundy said the same thing about his Pistons era. Like, you miss on a few draft picks and that's it. That's pretty much the game. So fast forward to today, the Celtics are the defending champions. I thought going into this year that they were going to repeat pretty safely. And now there are a number of reasons where that's in doubt. Number one, the Celtics have underperformed a little bit. Number two, the Cavaliers have overperformed and will probably have home court advantage throughout the playoffs. And then number three, the Thunder seem like real threats to win it all. Plus, they'll also have home court if they end up playing the Celtics. So what do you think in order, or not in any order? It's like, who do you consider the title favorites right now?
Yeah, I don't expect a run like Boston had last year, where they went 16-3 in the playoffs and really weren't threatened at all in any of those series.
Yeah.
I'm not overly concerned about this kind of midseason malaise that they're happening. I saw them play a couple of times, the overtime game against the Clippers this past week, and getting smacked by the Lakers. If you look back at even recent years, whether it's Denver a year earlier, the Golden State Warriors who won the title in 2022, teams go through a funk the year after they win a championship. It's just that hangover that exists. The Nuggets had a lot of problems last year. The Warriors, I think, right around this time of the 22-23 season, they were around 500. So, teams kind of go through it. In Boston, like that championship they won this past season was really a culmination of like 6 years of work. I mean,
yeah, they suffered for it.
Yeah, I mean, 4 or 5 conference finals for that group, the heartbreak in the 2022 finals against Golden State. Like they reached the mountaintop. That took a lot. So I kind of went into this year expecting to see some kind of funk emerge for them. And it just so happened it happened right around Christmas and when we're talking right now. So I think they're going to get over it is the point. Like I think when we get to March and April, you're going to see this team a lot sharper on both ends of the floor. The issue of the opponents being better is real, though. Cleveland, I give them all the credit in the world for what they're doing right now. I do need to see what it looks like in the playoffs because they're winning right now with depth, right? They're playing sometimes 10, 11 guys. Donovan Mitchell's an all-star starter, but he's only averaging like 23 points per game because they have a diverse offense and they've got, elite rim protection.
They restrict his minutes too. It's really impressive.
Yeah. They've got a lot of they're playing away, and Kenny Atkinson has been a miracle down there. What he's brought to that team has been brilliant. But they're playing a way that's conducive to winning a lot of regular season games. In the playoffs, as you know, rotations shorten up. You don't need to play 10 guys because you get 2 days off sometimes in between games. So I want to see what they look like when they shorten up that rotation. And a team like Boston or a team like New York or a team like Milwaukee really digs into some of their weaknesses. Like they play still 2 small guys in the backcourt in Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell. They play basically 2 non-3-point threats in the front court in Jared Allen and Evan Mobley. Can a team expose them as a result of that? I'm curious about that, number one. The point you made about Oklahoma City and Denver too, which has come on a lot in the last few weeks as Jamal Murray has kind of gotten his game together. That to me is the bigger threat to Boston. I mean, Oklahoma City is basically the Boston of the Midwest. Like they've built their team in a very similar way to the Celtics. They've got, 4 or 5 guys in the starting lineup that all play multiple positions, 4 or 5 guys that can defend 1 through 5. They can shoot it. They're dogs defensively. They've got Shea at the top of the ladder there to lead them. They're a big-time threat, I think, to the Celtics. They beat the Celtics in Oklahoma City last month. They've got a huge game coming up in March against Boston. I know a lot of people like myself will be watching. I'm worried about them if I'm Boston, and I'm looking at Denver too. Like, I don't believe that if the Nuggets had gotten to the conference finals, it would have, or gotten to the NBA finals last year, that it would have been as easy for Boston. Because I think the Nuggets are a much more difficult matchup for the Celtics, primarily because Jokic is a difficult matchup for everybody. So I think the Celtics, my biggest concern would be whatever monster comes out of the Western Conference is probably going to be a lot better than what they had to face last season.
Hello, YouTube. Please do hit that like and subscribe button. And don't forget, you can ask questions at mailbag@andrewyang.com. See you on the interwebs. So it sounds like you rate OKC Thunder as obviously, top contender out of the West. Then you put the Nuggets too, even though I think the Nuggets right now aren't the 2 seed because they've kind of, been up and down a little bit early in the season. I remember vividly last year in the playoffs, I thought the Celtics and the Nuggets were the 2 best teams. I thought the Nuggets, they were the defending champions at the time, so I thought the Nuggets would probably get out of the West. And then they lose that game 7 to the Timberwolves in Denver after being up something like 20 or something ridiculous, where it's like, whoa, what the hell happened there? Then they lose KCP. They bring in Russell Westbrook, who's been really awesome for them. That's been fascinating. But it felt like do you think the Nuggets? It sounds like you do. The Nuggets are the second best team out of the West. I'm thinking about who else you would put as the second best team out of the West if it's not the Nuggets. I think the Rockets right now are technically the number 2 seed, but it sounds like you're doubting them somewhat because they're young and unproven, which is true, and not really built for the playoffs either. I mean, that team will kind of have that happy to be here vibe, probably. And so then I think the next team up would be the Grizzlies, who definitely have like a mix of veterans, but it sounds like you take the Nuggets much more seriously than the Grizzlies.
A little bit, yeah. I do put Houston in kind of a different category. You can't skip steps in the NBA, right? And the next step for the Houston Rockets is get to the playoffs, probably win a first-round series, and then have your weaknesses exposed against a more experienced team, whether it is Oklahoma City or Denver. So I think they're going to run into those problems. To your point, they're just not quite built for great postseason success yet.
Yeah.
Mostly because they don't have that fourth quarter guy. Like that's one of the reasons they've been targeting guys like Kevin Durant and Devin Booker. One of the reasons that Jimmy Butler has been mentioned as, a potential candidate to be traded. They're still looking for that guy. Now maybe Jalen Green emerges as that guy in the next couple of years, but they're not quite there yet. Memphis has got a lot of those pieces. Like they defend. Ja Morant is a star. The Nuggets, their turnaround has been really surprising to me, in part because I didn't expect Russell Westbrook to play this much of a positive role with this team. I mean, look, he was effectively cut at a $2.5 million salary by the Clippers last year. He was out in the wilderness. If not for the Nuggets, who have Nikola Jokic, who loves him, who loves the energy he plays with, and Michael Malone, who loves playing veterans, loves veterans in his rotation. He might not have been in the league, if not for that. He comes in, and I think they're 18-5 or 19 and some absurd number with Russell Westbrook in the starting lineup. He has been exactly what this team has needed, an injection of energy, enthusiasm, toughness. He's been much better than I thought he was going to be defensively, playing alongside Jamal Murray. If he can keep that up in the postseason and play the way he's played so far up until this point, I would rate Denver right behind Oklahoma City in the conference.
So you've got the Grizzlies, the Warriors, the Lakers, and the Suns as all kind of wannabe contenders that none of us really like thinks of as a serious threat. And then on the other side, you have a number of players up for grabs that mostly are coming from the East, it seems like. So top of that list in my mind, I'm actually going to, like, this is my list, whatever, is Cam Johnson of the Nets. And there are rumors connecting him to the Grizzlies for sure. And then there's Jimmy Butler. And then there's Zach LaVine, who's actually having like, an underrated great shooting year, and whatnot. So if you look at these Western teams, like, which do you think ends up biting on, on any of those three players?
I would say the Grizzlies are a pretty strong candidate to make a Cam Johnson type of move before the deadline. I mean, they were in on Dorian Finney-Smith before the Lakers swooped in. That probably has the strongest chance of going through before this February 6th deadline. The other guys you mentioned, like, there's interest league-wide in some of these guys. But because of the way that the NBA's collective bargaining agreement is structured, the salary cap now is structured, it's really hard, Andrew, to trade guys with a $50 million salary, because you've got to, especially if you're a team that spends, you've got to effectively match dollar for dollar. You can't take back more money like you could in the past. So Jimmy Butler may want to find his way to Phoenix. Phoenix really may want Jimmy Butler, but unless the Phoenix Suns can find a taker for Bradley Beal before the deadline, I promise you, there aren't many, if any of them. Not to mention Bradley Beal has a no trade clause he can exercise. They're not going to be able to put a deal like that ultimately together. Same thing with Zach LaVine. He's having a great year in Chicago, but I have heard nothing, not a single whiff of serious interest from another team in Zach LaVine, largely due to the fact that he makes a ton of money, and it's really hard to put that salary onto your books without giving away half your team. So, and again, if you look at some of the deals that have been made so far, right? The Finney-Smith deal, the Dennis Schroeder deal, as the Nets have just basically dumped their team. The guys have been traded. They've all been right around $20 million or less in salary. Though that's kind of the manageable number in today's NBA. When you get over 25 million into the 30, 40, $50 million range, it's just almost impossible mid-season to make a deal like that.
You say that, and I hear it, and I understand the second apron and the teams that spend and all the problems. But then you look at Jimmy Butler and you think, are they really going to finish the season with this guy? I mean, I think he's been suspended twice. Mm-hmm. He clearly has absolutely no problem causing a stir if he's unhappy. He's on like a quasi expiring. I think he technically had an option. He might have already declined or something. But
it's got the option for next year, $52 million for next season. Yeah.
Yeah. But I just cannot imagine that dude finishing the year in Miami. Like, I feel like Miami at some point is going to be like, all right, what are we going to do? And to your point, if Bradley Beal didn't have a no trade clause, I bet that deal is already done. But if you're Bradley Beal, like, why would you approve a trade? I saw a rumor just today about Beal to the Bulls. And then the first thing I thought was, like, would Beal be cool with that? Like, I don't know what Bradley Beal's personal considerations are. And then there's part of me too that's like, can the Suns somehow make it worth his while? I have no idea how a team would do that. They go to him and be like, hey, you take this trade and, like, I don't know what we can send with you. I mean, at that point, the Suns are super motivated. So when you say super hard to trade guys making above a certain amount, it's like I get it. But then on the flip side, it's like won't they find a way to move Jimmy? Especially now the Suns, and this may or may not even facilitate the Butler Beal deal. But I was actually surprised when the Suns took their 2031 first round pick and turned it into 3 picks that are closer. I was like, wow, that's so clever. I saw that as like really, really smart. I didn't know if that was the norm. So I guess my question here is, so it's going to be a straight up or down. Do you think Jimmy Butler is a member of the Miami Heat after the trade deadline?
It's a great question, and such a tough question to answer, because I don't see a trade that makes sense for Miami. What the Heat have been telegraphing to teams that have called has been, we're not looking to take back any salary that extends beyond what Jimmy Butler's option year is, because I believe it's the summer of 2027, their books are largely going to be clean. They're going to have Bam Adebayo under contract, Tyler Hero under contract, the core of that team. Jaime Jaquez will be under contract as well. But beyond that, they can have some flexibility to do some things in the future. And they're the Miami Heat. You know, whatever's been going on with Jimmy Butler, players want to go and play in Miami. Players want to go and play for Eric Spoelstra. So Miami's not looking to clog up its books with bad contracts. And Bradley Beal is among the worst contracts in the NBA.
Yeah.
He's owed.
They wouldn't take Beal.
No, he's owed $100 million after this season and over the next 2 years. They don't want that contract. And, you know, I've been told explicitly by a person very close to Bradley Beal that he's not okaying a trade to a non-contender. So the Bulls, not a contender. The Detroit Pistons, another team that could take on some money, not a contender. Charlotte, not a contender. These teams that are usually out there as facilitators for deals like this they're just not there right now. So I'm going to say here, as we're recording this January 27th, that in 10 days time, Jimmy Butler is still on the Miami Heat. I don't.
Yeah, you go through the teams, you can't see it.
He's made it clear, like through intermediaries, and I've reported this over the last couple of weeks, that he doesn't want to play in Memphis or Sacramento or in Milwaukee. Like, look, let's be real. He doesn't really want to play in Phoenix either, but he knows that Matt Ishbia, the owner of the Phoenix Suns, is probably the only owner of the 30 teams out there that is crazy enough to give him a 2-year, $111 million extension that would take Jimmy Butler through the end of his career. This has been entirely about money from start to finish for Jimmy Butler. So that's why he wants to go to Phoenix. And Phoenix, to their credit, they're trying. You mentioned the deal that got them 3 first-round picks. That was a clever deal. It might cost them in the end because that 2031 unprotected they gave up is incredibly valuable, and teams will want that from Utah down the line. But getting those 3 first-round picks gives them some options, gives them some flexibility. But until they can figure out what to do with that Bradley Beal contract that makes sense for them and makes sense for Bradley Beal, we're going to be at the same stalemate we've been at for the last few weeks.
Have you made a New Year's resolution that's related to eating healthier, being a little bit more fit, losing a little bit of weight? Well, have I got great news for you. Factor meals can help you actually achieve that goal. Imagine fully prepared meals sent to you fresh. I'm good at a lot of things, I will confess, but I'm really crappy at cooking. And Factor makes it so that you can have a completely delicious, awesome meal in the comfort of your own home that's healthy, it's good for you. You know when you eat something and you know it's healthy? That's the experience with Factor. When I ordered it, the Nona's Bolognese, the mustard chicken, they hit the spot. They're quick, they're convenient, they get the job done, and then some. So you can eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/yang50off and use code yang50off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code yang50off at factormeals.com/yang50off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box.
Wow, that's fascinating. I think that they're going to use one of those 3 picks to get off of Nurkic's deal. I think you wind up seeing like some weird Nurkic.
How good? But I mean, you've been following this, like Nurkic coming out and saying this week that he hasn't had a single conversation with Mike Budenholzer in 2 months was wild, like absolutely wild. Like this, by the way, not surprising to me because I reported in the magazine before the season. I do these scouts takes, which are anonymous takes from different scouts around the league. And I had one scout that knows Budenholzer pretty well saying explicitly, Nurkic ain't going to work. Budenholzer is not going to like Nurkic. He likes Al Horford types of bigs, Brook Lopez types of bigs. He's not going to like this mediocre defensive, non-3-point shooting big in Nurkic. And here we are in late January where those two haven't found a way to talk in 2 months, according to Nurkic. And that's pretty wild to me.
Yeah. You don't ordinarily say that about your coach if you can help it, if you're a player. You know what team I think should be going for it that is not going for it in this way is the Spurs. I feel like Wembanyama's kind of here early. I don't know. It's like, you don't really see them involved in any of these conversations, but they have the assets. They could do it. I mean, we could go into some other, interesting scenarios too. I feel like the Pelicans have to do something before the trade deadline. I mean, they just have, it's like a, I mean, some of their players aren't healthy, but you could theoretically, actually, let me just ask you this. Like, do you think there's a possibility that Zion Williamson gets traded at any time in the next, maybe not this deadline, because that's like a very, very big move, but maybe over this coming offseason?
I would say no, because I think the Pelicans, number one, they still have faith that they can figure these health issues out with Zion. And the last thing that they want is in the next year or two, having to sell Zion low because you're not going to get dollar for dollar value back in exchange for him, and then have him figure it out. I mean, he still is in his early 20s, and we've seen guys, whether it's Joel Embiid and I'm sure a handful of others that have had injury issues early in their career, and they eventually figure them out. So the last thing the Pelicans want is to trade him to like Miami, for example, and then have him spend the next 10 years tormenting the rest of the Eastern Conference. They believe, or they're hoping anyway, that they can figure these issues out and he can get back on the track that we saw him on last year. We played 70 games last year. So it's not like it's not impossible for him to do that. They do need to make deals. They've been shopping Brandon Ingram pretty hard, but Ingram, who's had a serious injury issue this year, the interest just hasn't been there for Brandon Ingram overall. So that's the guy that they're most aggressively looking to move before this deadline. But that's another guy I'm pretty skeptical that they find a taker for. Just one thought on what you said about San Antonio. I understand the desire to put more pieces around Wembanyama because he is just ridiculous. I mean, he's awesome. But this is kind of the year that getting to 500 is the win. Like if you can get this team that's been so bad for the last 3 years to 41-41 or right around that number, you throw a parade down the street in San Antonio. You down the Riverwalk. You have a party down there. And then this offseason, you get to work on taking that next step. Like they've been connected to De'Aaron Fox, over the last few months. And I think that's a guy that if Sacramento makes him available, and they're going to have a contract situation with him coming up in the next few months as well. But if the Kings make him available, putting a guard like De'Aaron Fox opposite Victor Wembanyama, that to me feels like an ideal fit. So I think this is the year that they sit tight, hope to make a run at the play-in, and then this offseason, they get to work on building out the team to that next level.
Yeah, I was very against the Mike Brown firing when it happened, but then hey, Kings turned it around, and like who the heck knows? I mean, I would have thought De'Aaron Fox was probably getting traded, like a month ago. Just goes to show things can change very fast in the NBA. One of the arguments too for the Spurs not exactly going for it this year is that this year's draft is supposed to be pretty gangbusters. I don't know how much you keep track of like the draft class before they get there.
A decent amount, mostly right now at the top of the draft. I get into the other guys when we get towards not the NCAA tournament season, but February during these tournaments.
Okay, so top of the draft. People think of Cooper Flagg, that this is the Cooper Flagg draft, and all signs are he's going to go number 1, 2. I mean, like who are going to? I mean, who are the contenders to have the number 1 pick?
There's a race to the bottom. Race to the bottom going on right now.
And the prize is Cooper Flagg, who seems like he's going to be a perennial all-star. Maybe not exactly like your high-volume scorer type, but can do everything else. And then after that are like the 2 Rutgers guys. It's Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper. Do you have a read on number 1, whether that actually is the top 3? Is there anyone else that is threatening top 3?
I don't think anyone's threatening the top 2, at least. Ace Bailey is a terrific wing player, and I think is going to have a really good career as well. I don't think he threatens number 1, though. I've watched Cooper Flagg a lot this year. I went to a couple of games live, most recently the one they had against Kansas in Vegas about a month or so ago. And I agree with the assessment. Like, I don't think he's a transcendent Wembanyama type talent, but I do think there is a decade-long all-star in him. I mean, when I watch him play, I see a guy that is an advanced playmaker for a teenager. Like, he's one of Duke's primary playmakers out there. Defensively, he's well above his years. Like he's a really good multi-positional defensive player and a weak side shot blocker that gets everything that's around the rim. And look, he's not a great shooter right now, but we've seen young guys in the past come into the NBA with some weaknesses in their jump shot. Every NBA team's got dedicated shooting coaches. I think he's going to get better in that respect.
I saw a comp for him recently that blew my mind, but I was like, oh my God. White Scottie Pippen.
Yeah.
I mean, Pippen was a beast. The comp I had in my mind before was American Andrei Kirilenko.
I can. So the Pippen comp, the reason is the playmaking. Like Pippen was a great playmaker, and the defense, like great wing defender. Like I think that's it. He's obviously not. We don't know what he's going to get there on that level. And they got similar size, dimensions, so I can see that. Kirilenko defensively makes a lot of sense because Kirilenko as well, great weak side shot blocker, great team defender. I think Flag can do that. I think he's going to be much better offensively than Andre was. And Andre was a really good player overall, but I think the depth of his skill set is going to be significantly better than Andre's.
You got to love Cooper Flag's moniker too. Holy crap. Like he seems like a superhero, Where's he from? Maine?
Yeah.
Bust out like the number one draft pick, blonde kid from Maine, dunking on people and stuffing them. It is kind of, like almost too good to be true. The rest of it, I wonder how much NIL money he's making at Duke this year. All right, so you think that Ace Bailey doesn't threaten number one, but is right there, and like the comps for Ace Bailey, Paul George was one comp I saw. Who does Ace Bailey make you think of?
I think he's a little bit taller than Paul George. So I'm trying to think of like that 6'10" guy with a long wingspan that can play multiple positions. I haven't thought about the comp with him yet. It's got to be some kind of.
Is he like Durant light?
Yeah, but Durant was such an elite scorer at Texas. Like you knew what you were getting with him. I don't think I'm quite seeing that with Ace Bailey. Again, it's hard to with some of these guys with their offensive games being so underdeveloped. It's hard to really make a realistic comparison to what they are. I mean, the Flag stuff, when I see Flag and I see some of the comps out there, like I can buy into them because I've seen the playmaking. Like Duke's guards are not great. And Cooper Flag's oftentimes being asked to be a playmaker with that group. I think when he gets to the NBA with better guard play, it's going to unlock so many other things with his game. I think for Ace Bailey, I need to see a little bit more diversity of his offensive game before I can really give an accurate comp.
No, it's all to the good. I don't know his game very well either. I mean, it sounds like you might know better than me, but Rashard Lewis
Hey, there you go. Another all-star, another good wing player, all-star, developed into a pretty good three-point shooter. Yeah, I mean, that's not bad. I think he could be better than Rashard Lewis too. I do think he's a really talented kid. It's gonna be interesting to see how he pans out in the first couple of years.
This podcast is sponsored by Helix Sleep. I have always been in search of the perfect mattress. Sleeping something you do 8 hours a day on a good day, and it's a third of your life. Plus, it can make you healthier, more energetic, more productive. I'm a little bit of a productivity fiend, honestly. And so I was so excited to finally find out about Helix mattresses, the best mattress in the biz. Don't just take my word for it. GQ wired my kids. I took the sleep quiz at helixsleep.com and got matched with a Dawn Firm mattress that has been a game changer for me. I wake up refreshed, ready to take on the day. I kind of need a firm mattress. It's not Evelyn's jam so much, but it is mine. And I got to say, it has been worth every penny. Every moment I'm on this mattress makes me actually feel like I made a good life decision. Helix Sleep can give you that feeling every single morning when you wake up. Don't take my word for it. Go to helixsleep.com/yang for 20% off site-wide plus 2 free dream pillows with mattress purchase. That's helixsleep.com/yang for 20% off site-wide plus 2 free dream pillows with mattress purchase. helixsleep.com/yang.
So one of the major storylines that's been going on around the league has been lower TV ratings. It's been a thing. There are a bunch of theories around it. I've got some theories.
Okay.
But number one is and my data signed like some long term TV deal, so maybe it's moot. So number one, I just think people are watching TV less. Period. You know what I mean? It's like you talk to a young person, they're much more likely to be on their phone getting clips. Like they're not really sitting down for 2.5 hour game. I think that the programming choices have had an impact in the sense that at this point you kind of need to have cable or streaming or whatnot to watch games. I mean, there was a period not that long ago, you and I remember, certainly like the big games on NBC and all of that. It's like you turn it on and there's like weekend games. It was on network TV, and now it seems like the games are all on something you have to pay for. There's talk of the play style, and I did say this to my wife the other day. Now a lot of teams play the same because they figured out that 3 is more than 2, and so they can optimize for a 3-pointer. They can play. They talk about how the biggest stars are not Americans now, or at least some of the biggest stars. So it's Giannis and Luka, and that Americans just don't get as jazzed. One thing I'm going to throw in there too, for sure, is that I'm obviously a very, very big NBA fan, but it takes me a minute to remember who has won the last several NBA titles, in part because no one has repeated. You know what I mean? So like if you rewind X years ago, what was it? It was like the Golden State dynasty, and then like LeBron and the Cavs trying to win, and then before that it was like LeBron and the Heat, and like who's going to stop them? And then before that it might have been
Lakers early in the 2000s.
Yeah, the Pau Gasol, like, and then Lakers Celtics clash, and like now, if you were to say, hey, the Nuggets won the championship, in 23, people would be like, oh yeah, that happened. And then you had like this flurry of one-time champions that started with, gosh, who did it start with? Even like maybe the Raptors in like 2019.
Yeah, I think since over the last 6 years, there's not been not only not a repeat champion, but I believe not a repeat conference finalist either.
Yeah, so parity, in theory, people love parity. But dominant champions and dynasties make for very, very compelling storylines. Certainly right now in football, you're seeing it with the Chiefs. I mean, like, it could be like the first, football dynasty. And I confess, I was rooting pretty hard against them for the Bills. And, even back in the day, what's funny is when Jordan and the Bulls were running the league, as at that time a Knicks fan, like I freaking hated those guys, but it was like very, very easy to keep track of what was going on in the league. There's like a very, very dominant storyline and dominant characters. And now the dominant characters, I'm going to suggest, are still LeBron and Steph Curry, except, their teams are probably going to be out of there in the first round. I mean, like you don't even know if they, maybe one of them might even end up in the play-in. So I have just made a list of reasons that someone could throw out there for why viewing interest is down. So I'm going to throw it to you to ask, like, do you think this is a problem?
I do think it's a problem. Let me unpack a couple of things that you said there. I don't know that the diversification of the talent globally is a big issue, because I think there's so many kids that now want to play like Luka. He's such a mega star anywhere. Maybe Jokic doesn't have the fan base that another.
You don't want to buy Jokic's sneakers, bro.
Yeah, no. And Jokic, whatever it's worth, Jokic doesn't really care. He doesn't put himself out there.
He just wants to go back to the horses. Yeah, we know.
Exactly. The second his NBA season's over, he's gone. He spent the entire Olympic tournament not talking to the media because he didn't have to, right? Like he just wants to play the game and go off and do something else. Giannis still has a pretty big fan base as well. I think the NBA would certainly agree with you that dynasties equal ratings. Like the Golden State Warriors dynasty drew huge ratings when they were in the finals. The Heat, such a polarizing team early on, but they drew huge ratings. Remember ESPN, started that Heat Index down there. Sent a whole troop of reporters with Brian Windhorst and others to cover the Heat during those years. The NBA would agree with that, but they believe that it's better for the long-term health of the NBA for them to have an NFL type model where a different team gets a chance at a championship every single year. I mean, this is something that really began under David Stern. Like, David Stern had these dreams in the early 2000s of becoming an NFL type of league. And every collective bargaining agreement they've done from, 2011 to 2016 to the most recent one has been building towards that, trying to make it so that talent can't cluster in one spot whenever they want to, trying to make it difficult to do trades, trying to make it so the teams that build their rosters out organically, like in Oklahoma City or Denver, have great chances to win championships. So the NBA, I think, is willing to take the pain of having lower ratings in, say, the NBA Finals in order to have competitive games during the regular season and certainly in the early rounds of the playoffs. On the style of play, I think that's a real issue. That's something I wrote about in the magazine coming out in a few weeks. The NBA's got a three-point problem, in my opinion. These games are turning into three-point shooting contests every single night. Now, Boston has kind of cracked the code here. They play like 7 or 8 guys that all shoot threes in high volumes and all shoot with high accuracy. They're going to break the all-time record for three-point attempts per game, by probably 4 or 5 when it's all said and done. They're probably going to average more than 50 per game. There's like 6 or 7 teams out there. They're going to average more than 40 per game. And that's a trend, Andrew, that is only going to continue. Because like I mentioned earlier in the show, Oklahoma City, built out its team kind of like Boston. A lot of three-point shooting, wing type of players. Every team in the league is going to try to do that. So you're only going to see these three-point numbers go up. And I don't think that there's as broad a fan base for a three-point shooting contest as the NBA wants. Some of these young guys, young kids, they love watching the threes. They love Steph Curry. They love these three-point shootouts. But to your point earlier, a lot of them are watching them on clips. They're not sitting down and watching full games. The people that do sit down and watch full games, they don't want to watch this. Like, they don't want to watch, 50 threes from one team, 45 for the next team. They want something a little bit more old school. So I think the biggest challenge for the NBA is tweaking its system, whether it's a defensive rule change. I don't think they'll experiment with the three-point line, but that's something they could consider as well. They've got to do something to bring some of these numbers down, to diversify the offense a little more than just, hey, we're going to drive and kick, or we're going to shoot early shot clock threes. That's not good for the product. And I think is something that everyone in the NBA will agree with.
I've got the fix, Chris. It's really obvious. You just reduce the value of a three-pointer to like 2.6. Done.
So one thing, I will tell you this, Andrew, one thing that I talked to Adam Silver about this in December. And look, in my story, I kind of float a bunch of wild ideas. Not the 2.6. That's a pretty good one. I'm going to have to go back into the story and add that.
Yeah, please.
But like one thing that he said was like, look, we don't want to confuse our fans, right? Like they love the in-season tournament, but it's been very confusing, right? Like what games matter, what games count. Like they acknowledge that. Like they don't want to do anything that confuse the fans. One thing I had suggested in the story was like, hey, how about you put a cap on the number of threes that count as 3 per game? Like you can make 15 threes per game, say. And look, in theory, I think it makes some sense, but it does confuse the fan base. It's probably going to be looking at the board going, how many threes did we take
get to
already?
Your 15 threes and then like that.
it's just, look, there is a pretty simple fix. Like ever since the early 2000s, when hand checking was completely legislated out, they've made it really easy for guys on the perimeter to get their shots off. If you bring back some form of hand checking, if you allow guys to be a little more physical on the perimeter, that's going to open things up. Because if a guy's got a hand on him or if a guy's got a forearm on him, he's much less likely to pull up from 3. So if there's one minor rule change I would make, it's allow these perimeter defenders to be a little more physical and force these guards and wingmen to pass up threes and go to the basket a little more often.
This podcast is sponsored by ExpressVPN. How did you choose which internet service provider to use? The sad thing is, most of us didn't have much of a choice because ISPs operate a lot like monopolies in the regions that they serve. They then use this monopoly position to take advantage of customers, and yes, they even sell your data, your activities to advertisers and big tech companies, and you don't see a dime. That's why I protect my internet surfing and devices with ExpressVPN. When you use ExpressVPN, it's like a magic portal to a perfectly safe and anonymous internet. And don't take my word for it. This is the #1 VPN service according to CNET. It's used by major companies all over the world. So stop handing over your personal data to ISPs and other tech companies who then mine your activity and sell off your information. Protect yourself with a VPN I trust to keep my privacy online. Visit expressvpn.com/yang. That's expressvpn.com/yang to get 3 extra months free. Go to expressvpn.com/yang right now to learn more.
Dude, I'm telling you, 2.6 problem solved. Like seriously, throw that in there. You know,
That is going to confuse the hell out of everybody. Let me tell you that. That's going to confuse all of them.
As a numbers guy, I know like no one would ever accept like decimal scoring. But I'm telling you, like that's the answer.
You want like 112.6 to 104.5 is what you're looking for.
I mean, that's the way it's gonna. I mean, that's the way, because the problem here is that 3-pointers are worth 50% more than 2-pointers, and so if I make 35% of my threes, it's still a fine shot, and I can get that off even if you're standing right in front of me with my hand in my face. Because
can you imagine? You're a longtime NBA fan. Like, 3-point line's been in existence since the 80s. I remember back like 20 years ago where Don Nelson was considered a whack job for the amount of threes that his team was ultimately taking. Like, we've come a long way in the last 20 years to the point where, like, if a guy pulls up for a mid-range jump shot, he's getting a talking to on that bench. I mean, we mentioned Ron Mercer early on. Ron Mercer came into the NBA like this elite mid-range shooter. Like, that kind of player has been almost completely legislated out of the NBA.
Well, this is one reason why I'm going to sound like some old school, curmudgeon or whatever. But like it used to be, to your point, like you would get yanked if you took an ill-advised shot, which is typically a 3, like that you had no business taking. The problem now is that the shooters are good enough where that crap 3 that I just threw up, even though there was a dude around me, was probably the right shot. Like James Harden step back with someone in his face. You can build a whole offense around that. So, whereas in the day it'd be like, hey, get that guy out of there. And now that it would be like if someone takes a long 2, then you'd get that guy out. And so
there was the great Antoine Walker line from when he was with Miami at that point, and somebody asked him why he shot so many threes as a power forward. His answer was because they don't allow 4s. So like that's kind of the mindset. If they ever allowed 4-point shots, you'd see a whole bunch of guys pulling up from there too.
Yeah, and what's funny, man, it's like I am a numbers guy, and when I say to my wife, it's like I think math might have broken the NBA in the sense that if you do what's optimal, you have a lot of teams jacking threes playing like each other, and then it'll just keep on ratcheting up and up. And I will say I miss the guys who made it work despite not having great shooting ability. I mean, like who am I thinking as the archetypes of them? I guess you might think Dennis Rodman or someone like that, where it's like, does Rodman have a place in the league today?
Well, it's also like I want more. I miss good post play. Like you, of course, remember the was it 95 finals with the Knicks and the Rockets? Like watching. Was it 94? One of those two. Like the Hakeem versus Ewing matchup. Like I can still remember it now. I was probably 14 years old at that point. I can still remember how good that matchup was. I miss watching 2 great post players going at it. You don't have that anymore because now, I was like, for example, like we were talking about rookies a moment ago. Zach Edey, lottery pick from Memphis, spent his entire career in college playing in the paint. I think he attempted 1 3-pointer or 2 3-pointers during his entire career in college. The games I've seen of Memphis, he's out there warming up behind the 3-point line. Like if you're a big coming into today's NBA, to extend your career, to make a whole bunch of money, you've got to become a three-point shooter. I miss the days of great low post play, and I'm not sure it's ever coming back.
Well, I mean, it would come back if you made it a 2.6 pointer, but
You're just banging that drum.
Yeah, I would
send this video to Adam Silver's office.
Oh, please do. But one of the things that, I mean, obviously you couldn't implement that. it would, people would hate it. But to your point about post play and remembering, I mean, I remember that series vividly. But the games felt more like contests of wills back then, because you kind of had to go through the dude. It's like I remember that era of Knicks where it was Oakley and Mason and Starks, and you had to like kind of out tough the other guys, and then sometimes it didn't work. Like sometimes like that they would outskill you. But now a lot of the toughness seems like it's been put by the wayside, because if you're a tough guy who can't shoot, you're not in the league. You know what I mean? Like you just need to have as many shooters as possible. And it does make me feel, again, like I'm some old-fashioned fuddy-duddy, like hearkening back to the day, because I recognize that these guys are more skilled and more athletic. But I do kind of miss the days when someone could grit their way into the NBA, because it doesn't feel like you can anymore.
Well, it was, yeah, you framed it correctly. Like it was a battle of wills at times. And I used to love, as a young kid, watching, Jordan try to get through the Detroit Pistons back in the day, the physicality of the Pistons against the greatness of Jordan. That's why when some people say Jordan would average like 35, 40 in today's NBA, I'd buy it, because he was putting up big numbers against physical defenses back then. Today, he wouldn't have to deal with any of that. Kobe, kind of the same thing, just, willing his way to that mid-range spot to make a tough shot. Nowadays, if you can make a three, you're, 60, 70% of the way there to becoming a really good player in the NBA. And I do miss those battle of wills, the physicality of those matchups, the individual tough matchups. And I don't know. I don't know what you can do to bring them back to today's game.
Yeah, it made everything seem like more of a test of mettle, and like you almost saw like the character of people in the teams, and like people would sometimes break through and sometimes wilt. It was awesome, and we all know how to get it back, Chris. The 2.6 pointer. No, all right.
2.6. Mike, I'm looking forward to that finals matchup when it's like, all right, the Celtics are trailing the Thunder by 0.4 points here. What do they do there coming up?
Well, yeah, what do they do here?
And what are your thoughts? What are we doing here?
Kick a field goal. Well, Chris, appreciate your being here a great deal. I know people will be tuned in to see what the heck happens at the trading deadline. If someone does want to follow you and all of your reporting, how can they best do so?
Yeah, I'm on all the social channels at SI Chris Mannix, writing obviously regularly over at SI.com. And I will send you, you said you were a magazine subscriber, Andrew. We can get that subscription back updated once again. I can get you back on the sub list for the magazine, which is still printing every single month.
Done. I will. I will get on that list, and I will happily receive my magazines and go through it in detail, because I miss it.
Yeah, me too.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Chris, for being here.
My pleasure, Andrew. Thanks for having me.